Okay, so here's what you think you know about contract killers. You've watched the movies, you've seen the guy in the tailored suit with the silenced pistol and the offshore bank account. Somebody picks up a phone, names a target, wires $500,000 to a numbered account in the Cayman Islands, and 48 hours later, the job is done and nobody ever traces it back to anyone. That's the picture. That's what decades of Hollywood thrillers and crime dramas have trained you to believe. And it works as fiction because it sounds like it could be a real business, a specialized service performed by someone who is very good at a very dark thing and who charges accordingly. Here's what the FBI's actual case files look like. In one documented murder for hire investigation, the quoted price to kill a human being was $600, not 600,000. 600. That's less than most people's monthly car payment. That's a weekend at a mid-range hotel. That's what someone put on the table to end another person's life, and the FBI logged it, because that's the kind of number that keeps showing up in their records. And if you're thinking that has to be an outlier, some desperate rock-bottom case that doesn't represent anything real, the research says otherwise. The Australian Institute of Criminology conducted the most comprehensive study ever done on this subject. They examined 163 attempted and completed contract killings over a 13-year period, and what they found blows the Hollywood version apart. The average payment to a hired killer across that entire dataset was about $15,000. More than half of all hitmen received less than $9,000. The lowest documented payment was $500. The highest was $100,000, and that was the ceiling, not the norm. So we are not talking about wire transfers and offshore accounts. We are talking about a business where the median worker makes less per job than what a used Honda Civic costs. And that number, that pathetically small number, is the single biggest clue to how this entire industry actually operates. Because the price is that low for a reason that has very little to do with the value of a human life, this market is broken in ways that nobody outside of law enforcement and criminology has ever really thought about. How does someone who wants another person dead actually go about finding someone willing to do it? That question is the key to the whole thing, and the answer is stranger than anything you've seen in a movie. Start with something simple. Think about the last time you hired someone to do a job. A plumber, a contractor, a mechanic. Before you handed over your money, you could do one fundamental thing that makes every market on earth work. You could check reviews on Google, a friend's recommendation, a license number. And if they did a lousy job, you had options. Leave a bad review, file a complaint, dispute the charge, take them to small claims court. The entire reason you can hire a stranger to come into your house and fix your pipes is that accountability runs in both directions. The provider knows that if they rip you off, it follows them. And you know that if the work comes back bad, you have somewhere to go. Now take all of it away. Every single piece. No reviews, no ratings, no references. No way to verify whether the person you're about to hand money to has ever done the job before, because their past clients are people who committed serious felonies and will never talk about it. And no consumer protection of any kind, because the product you are buying is itself the crime. That is the market for contract killing. And it gets worse, because in most markets, the worst thing that happens is you lose your money and waste your time. Here, you could spend the rest of your life in federal prison. And not because the killing went wrong, because the hiring went wrong. Under United States federal law, the solicitation of murder for hire is a standalone felony. You don't need a completed murder. You don't even need a real hitman on the other end. The moment you seriously discuss paying someone to kill another person using any channel of interstate commerce, and that includes your phone, your email, and the internet, you have committed a federal offense. If nobody dies, that carries up to 10 years. If someone does die, it's life, or the death penalty. So, from the first second of this transaction, before any money changes hands, the buyer is in a position that no buyer in any other market has ever been in. You cannot verify what you're getting. You cannot enforce delivery. And you cannot complain if they take your money and vanish. Because complaining means telling someone you tried to have a person murdered. But there's one more structural problem, and it's the one that breaks this market in a way that can never be repaired. The person on the other side of this deal, the hitman, has leverage over you the instant the conversation starts. They know what you asked for. They know you committed a federal crime by asking. They can go to the police whenever they feel like it. They can demand more money. They can take what you gave them, do absolutely nothing, and dare you to do something about it. And you have no response to any of that, because every possible move you could make from that point forward either confirms your guilt or makes it worse. In every other market, the customer has leverage. You can leave a bad review, switch providers, walk away, and never come back. Here, the provider holds all of the power and the customer holds none, and that makes it a trap. And that single fact, that the seller has permanent leverage over the buyer, explains almost everything about how the world of contract killing actually works. It explains why the prices are absurdly low, because the buyer can't shop around and has zero negotiating power. It explains why the people doing this work are almost never real professionals, because professional infrastructure can't form in a market where trust is impossible and one side can destroy the other at any moment. And it explains why the single most common outcome of a murder-for-hire attempt in this country is the buyer in handcuffs. The FBI investigates roughly 100 of these cases every year through 35 violent crime task forces spread across the country, and the vast majority of them end in convictions. And the most common way those cases start is not some brilliant piece of detective work. It's not a forensic breakthrough. It's a phone call. Somebody gets asked to help arrange a killing, and instead of doing it, they pick up the phone and call the police. That is the real market for contract killing. No reviews, no accountability, no consumer protection, and a product where the person selling it has more power over the person buying it than in any other transaction you will ever hear about. If this is starting to change how you think about the whole industry, hit subscribe, because the actual mechanics of how people try to navigate this broken market are even stranger than the economics. So, if this market has no infrastructure, no directory, no professional network, and no safe way to even ask, how does anyone find a hitman in the first place? The answer, and this is where the Hollywood version falls apart completely, is that most people who try to hire a contract killer do it the same way you'd find a guy to help you move a couch. They ask someone they know. That's it. That's the method. There's no secret website, no underground referral chain, no phone number you call after saying the right words to the right person. In the overwhelming majority of documented murder-for-hire cases, the person trying to arrange a killing simply walks up to someone they believe has criminal connections, someone they know from work, from their neighborhood, from their social circle, and they ask, out loud, in person, sometimes in a text message, sometimes in a voicemail, and then they wait to see what happens. What happens, in a staggering percentage of these cases, is that the person they asked picks up the phone and calls the police. Because it turns out that knowing someone who once got arrested is not the same thing as knowing someone who is willing to kill a stranger for money. And most people, even people with criminal records, even people who have done serious time, are not willing to cross that line. They hear the request, they realize what they're being dragged into, and they make a very simple calculation. Helping the police is a much better deal than helping you. From there, the process follows a pattern so predictable that the FBI has turned it into a near-routine operation. Law enforcement introduces an undercover agent or a cooperating informant into the conversation. That agent plays the role of the hitman, accepts money, discusses the target on a recorded line, and once enough evidence exists to sustain a conviction, they make the arrest. Nearly 2 cases a week, every week, just at the federal level. And the conviction rate is enormous, because the evidence is almost always the buyer's own words on tape. But here's the detail that sits underneath all of this and makes the entire pattern even more revealing. The most common motive for trying to hire a hitman is not gang warfare. It's not organized crime. It's not silencing a witness or eliminating a business rival. According to the Australian Institute of Criminology's study, nearly 20% of all contract killing attempts were motivated by the dissolution of an intimate relationship, a marriage falling apart, a custody battle, a bitter divorce, a partner who wants out and has decided that murder is somehow simpler than a lawyer. That tells you something about the buyer that the movies never show you. The typical person trying to hire a hitman is a regular person in a bad relationship who has somehow convinced themselves that this is a rational option, and they walk into the worst market on earth with no idea what they're doing. What comes next is the part that still doesn't make sense to most people. Because if the buyers are amateurs, you might assume that at least some of the sellers are professionals. That there must be a tier of real, experienced contract killers out there running this as a legitimate trade. Criminologists have actually studied this. They've gone through decades of case files and forensic records, and they've classified the people who end up on the other side of these deals into 4 categories. 4 types of contract killer, ranked by competence and by how difficult they are to catch. The first type is the novice. This is the most common category by a wide margin. The novice is typically unemployed, has a background in petty crime, and gets caught because they leave forensic evidence everywhere. They don't plan. They don't know how investigations work. They usually have no prior experience with violence at this level, and they get identified through a combination of local intelligence and their own basic mistakes. A novice is the kind of person who accepts $2,000 to kill someone, drives to the target's house in their own car, and is on security camera footage within the first 5 minutes. The second type is the dilettante. Wider range of backgrounds, wider range of methods, but they still get caught. Usually through confession, often to a friend or family member who goes straight to the police, or through forensic evidence they didn't know they were leaving. The third type is the journeyman. Typically ex-military, geographically stable, targeting businessmen or rival gang members. These are people with genuine operational discipline, and the cases that get solved tend to involve long investigations and informant cooperation rather than simple forensic mistakes. And then there's the fourth type, the master. The master leaves no forensic evidence. They are either ex-military, professional criminals, or both. They are geographically mobile, meaning they don't operate in the same city where they live. And they are, by far, the rarest category in the entire data set. The reason researchers know the least about masters is the same reason they're called masters. They don't get caught often enough to study. But those four categories tell a very specific story. The overwhelming majority of documented contract killings, the ones that ended up in court records and criminology databases, involve the first two types. Novices and dilettantes, amateurs, people who had no idea what they were doing and left a trail that any competent detective could follow in a week. And the pay reflects exactly that. 3/4 of all contracts valued at under $20,000 involve these amateur-level killers. The Australian data shows it clearly, and the American case files tell the same story. The people accepting these jobs are not career professionals operating at the top of some underground hierarchy. They're broke, they're desperate, and in many cases, they're being manipulated by the buyer into thinking the job is simpler than it actually is. Take Richard Kuklinski. Kuklinski is probably the most famous contract killer in American criminal history. He claimed to have killed over 100 people on behalf of mafia families over a period of decades. He was interviewed by HBO. He became the subject of books and a feature film. He's the closest thing to the Hollywood archetype that the real world has ever produced. And according to the records and his own statements, he received approximately $1,600 per killing. That's not a typo, by the way. $1,600. A plumber makes more than that on a bathroom renovation. And Kuklinski was connected. He worked for organized crime families who could have paid more. But the market doesn't demand more, because the buyers have no power and the sellers have no competition to drive prices up. In organized crime specifically, a significant number of contract killings don't even involve a separate payment at all. Junior members of criminal organizations carry out killings as part of their regular duties for their regular monthly compensation, which runs somewhere between $2,500 and $4,000 a month at entry level. So the killing is just part of the job description, a task you do because someone above you told you to, and your salary already covers it. So now you know who the buyers are, regular people in bad situations. And you know who the sellers are, mostly amateurs who get caught, with a thin layer of organized crime operatives doing it as part of their day job. But the one place where you'd expect this market to have finally gotten its act together, the internet, is where the story takes a turn that nobody saw coming. The internet has done something genuinely remarkable for almost every market it has touched. You can order a car with your phone. You can hire a freelancer in another country while you're eating breakfast. You can buy a house you've never visited based on a virtual tour and a set of documents that get signed electronically. The internet took broken, inefficient markets and made them work by solving the exact problems we just talked about. Verification, trust, reviews, accountability, comparison shopping, all of it. So you would expect, reasonably, that the internet would have done the same thing for contract killing. That somewhere on the dark web, the hidden layer of the internet that runs on anonymized browsers and encrypted connections, there would be some version of a functioning marketplace where buyers and sellers meet, transactions happen, and the work gets done. That expectation is wrong. And the way it's wrong is almost comical. Researchers at Michigan State University conducted a study on dark web hitman for hire sites and reached a conclusion that is as simple as it is absolute. Every single one of them is a scam. Not most of them. Not the majority. Every single dark web hitman site that has ever been investigated by researchers or law enforcement has turned out to be either a pure fraud operation or a law enforcement honeypot designed to catch the people trying to place orders. There has never been a verified case anywhere in the world of someone successfully hiring a real hitman through the dark web. Not one. The most famous example is a site called Besa Mafia. Besa Mafia presented itself as a professional assassination marketplace, allegedly run by Albanian organized crime figures. It accepted Bitcoin payments ranging from $5,000 to $20,000. You could browse services the way you'd browse categories on any e-commerce site. You could place an order for a murder, for an assault, for arson. You could specify whether you wanted it to look like an accident, which cost extra. Pay attention to this next detail, because it explains everything about why this market can never work. The person running Besa Mafia, who went by the name Yura, did not employ a single hitman, not one. He built the website, set the prices, accepted the Bitcoin, and then did absolutely nothing. When customers followed up to ask why the job hadn't been completed, he gave them excuses. The target moved. The team needs more time. There was a complication. Send more money and we'll finish the job. The same script over and over for years. He also ran at least 2 other sites under different names, Crime Bay and Kimura Hitman, all operating the same way. Take the money, stall, take more money, stall again. And the customers couldn't do anything about it, because what are they going to do? Call the police and explain that the assassination they ordered online hasn't been delivered? This went on until April of 2016, when a group of vigilante hackers broke into the Besa Mafia database and published the contents. What they found inside was staggering. Hundreds of real orders from real people, with real names, real addresses, real photographs of real targets. These were not fake entries or test accounts. These were actual human beings who had logged on, uploaded a photo of someone they knew, described where that person lived and worked, and paid thousands of dollars in Bitcoin to have them killed. The FBI received the leaked data and immediately began tipping off potential victims. Romanian authorities eventually arrested 5 men alleged to be the site's administrators. And here's the part that makes this whole thing even darker. Despite the fact that Besa Mafia was a complete scam, some of the people listed as targets on the site were later found dead. Not because Besa Mafia killed them, but because some of the buyers, after their online order went nowhere, went and found another way to do it themselves. Multiple customers were identified and charged with solicitation of murder based on the leaked records. And at least one new dark web hitman site took things a step further by charging people a fee just to sign up, scamming the would-be murderers before they could even place a fake order. If this is reshaping how you think about this whole world, subscribe, because the reason none of this will ever change is the part that ties the whole picture together. So, the digital marketplace is a fraud factory. But what about the real-world attempts? The ones where somebody actually finds a person willing to try, pays them cash, and points them at a target. How does that business perform? Badly. Historically, mathematically, almost impressively badly. The Australian Institute of Criminology dataset includes both completed and attempted contract killings, and the numbers tell a story that would bankrupt any normal business. Roughly 30% of all attempted contract killings in the study were never actually carried out. The hitman took the money and disappeared. Or they got to the scene and lost their nerve. Or they showed up at the wrong address. Or they simply decided that the risk wasn't worth whatever they were being paid and walked away. 3 out of every 10 contracts ended with no killing and no refund. That's the kind of number that makes accountants cry, because in any other industry, a 30% non-delivery rate would destroy you. Imagine hiring a contractor to build a deck and being told there's a 1 in 3 chance they'll take your deposit and never come back. And if that happens, you can't do anything about it. No review, no chargeback, no lawsuit. You just lose the money and you can't tell anyone why. But the failure rate is only half the story. The other half is what happens after the job is supposedly done. Because even when a contract killing is carried out, the chain of evidence that leads back to the buyer is almost always long, fragile, and full of people who can talk. Think about what has to stay secret for a contract killing to go unpunished. The buyer had to tell at least one person what they wanted. That person had to either do the job or find someone who would. Money had to change hands. The crime itself had to happen somewhere, with physical evidence. And now, at least 2 people, the buyer and the killer, know about a murder and have to keep that secret for the rest of their lives. If either one of them ever gets arrested for anything else, ever gets into a dispute with the other, ever gets drunk and says the wrong thing to the wrong person, ever decides that cooperating with the police is a better deal than a life sentence, the whole thing unravels. And that's exactly what keeps happening. The FBI's conviction rate on murder for hire cases is described as the vast majority. And when you look at why, the pattern is obvious. These cases don't stay hidden because there are too many moving parts and too many people involved who have every incentive to talk. The hitman gets picked up for something unrelated and trades information for a reduced sentence. The buyer tells a friend, and the friend calls the police. The payment leaves a trail. The conversations were recorded. The buyer Googled how to hire a hitman on their home computer. Under the federal statute, remember, the solicitation alone is the crime. So the FBI doesn't even need a completed murder to put the buyer away. They just need evidence that the buyer seriously discussed paying for one and used some channel of interstate commerce to do it. A phone call is enough. A text message is enough. An email is enough. And in the age of digital communication, almost every one of these conversations creates a record that survives long after the people involved think it's gone. Compare that to the Hollywood version. John Wick has the Continental Hotel, gold coins, a high table, a whole parallel economy with rules and consequences. The real world has a market where a third of the sellers never deliver. The digital version is 100% scam, and the buyers are mostly regular people who walk into the worst deal of their lives because they got the idea from a movie. So why? Why can't this market professionalize? Why hasn't someone, somewhere, built the infrastructure that would make it work? Because the product itself makes it impossible. In every functioning market on Earth, professional infrastructure appears when four conditions exist. First, providers need a verifiable track record, so buyers can tell the good ones from the bad. Second, there need to be enforceable agreements, some mechanism that guarantees the work gets done or the money comes back. Third, there has to be recourse for non-delivery, a way for the buyer to escalate when things go wrong. And fourth, there need to be repeat customer incentives, a reason for the provider to do good work because their future business depends on it. Contract killing fails on every single one. There is no verifiable track record because the provider can't advertise and the past clients can't talk. A hitman can't show you a portfolio. They can't point to satisfied customers. And even if they could somehow prove they've done the work before, that proof is also a confession to multiple homicides, which means sharing it creates a new set of legal risks that no rational person would accept. There are no enforceable agreements because the contract itself is a crime. You can't write a binding document that says, "I will pay you $10,000 to kill my neighbor," and expect any court on the planet to uphold it. The agreement is illegal on its face. There is no mechanism, none, for enforcement. There is no recourse for non-delivery. If the hitman takes your money and does nothing, you cannot file a complaint. You cannot leave a negative review. You cannot call anyone. Your only options are to absorb the loss in silence or try to find someone else, and that means walking right back into the same broken market and taking the same set of risks all over again. And there are no repeat customer incentives, because the vast majority of people who try to hire a hitman are doing it exactly once. They want one person dead. They're not building a long-term business relationship, so the provider has no reason to care about quality, because there is no future transaction to protect. Whether the job goes well or badly, nothing changes for the provider, because the buyer can never tell anyone what they hired you to do. Now add the one factor that makes this market truly unlike anything else: the leverage problem. In every other market, the seller wants the buyer's money and the buyer wants the seller's work, and that mutual need keeps both sides honest. In this market, the seller wants the buyer's money, and the seller also holds the buyer's freedom in their hands. From the moment the conversation starts, the hitman has something far more valuable than whatever the buyer is paying. They have knowledge of a federal crime that could put the buyer in prison for the rest of their life. That leverage is permanent. It doesn't expire. It doesn't diminish. And it means that the seller can extract additional payments, change the terms, refuse to deliver, demand more money after the fact, or simply threaten to go to the police. And the buyer has no countermove. In economics, this is called a hold-up problem, a situation where one party to a deal can exploit the other after the deal is made because the other party has already committed resources they can't recover. Except in this case, the buyer isn't just risking money. They've handed over their freedom the moment they open their mouth. And this is why the Hollywood version of contract killing can never exist. People have tried to professionalize this business. The incentive structure makes it economically impossible. Trust requires accountability. Accountability requires some form of enforceable consequences. Enforceable consequences require a legal framework. And the product, by its very definition, is the single most illegal product there is. You can't build a professional industry on a foundation that dissolves the moment anyone tries to hold anyone else accountable. So what you get instead is exactly what the data shows. A market full of scammers who know their victims can never report them. Amateurs who stumble into the work and stumble right back out into a pair of handcuffs. And a handful of organized crime operations where the killing isn't even a market transaction at all, it's just part of someone's job. Remember that $600 number from the beginning? The one that sounded like it had to be a mistake? It wasn't a mistake. It was the market telling you what the service is actually worth, in a world where the buyer can't verify anything, can't negotiate from any position of strength, and hands over permanent blackmail material the moment they open their mouth. $600 is not what a human life is worth. It's what a promise is worth when the person making it has every incentive to lie and the person receiving it has no way to check. The movies built a version of this business that runs on competence, codes, and a professional infrastructure that keeps everything quiet. The real version runs on desperation, ignorance, and a market so fundamentally broken that the most successful business model inside it is a website that takes your Bitcoin and gives you nothing in return. So the question you walked in with, how do hitmen make money, has the wrong assumption baked into it. In a market this broken, almost nobody does. The scammers make money, the FBI makes cases, and the buyers, almost without exception, end up in a worse position than when they started, whether the job gets done or not. That's the business. That's what it looks like when you strip away the fiction and follow the money. Tell me where you're watching from in the comments. And if this changed how you see the whole thing, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.